Okay, well, listen, it's 2 minutes past starting time, so we'll get started. Let me introduce myself. This is the North Yorkshire, the Yorkshire Dales National Park Authority planning Parish Council planning webinar, and it's hopefully interactive. My name's Andrew Murday. I'm the champion for development in the Park Authority. I'm appointed by North Yorkshire Council actually to the authority, but I'm North Yorkshire Councillor for Pateley Bridge and Nidderdale, which is just outside the national park, but of course, shares all the same issues as the national landscape shares almost all the same issues on a different scale, though, to the national to the park authority. So just a few housekeeping things. Obviously, you're on mute. If you've got a question that arises during one of the talks, then if you could put it in the chat box, then Richard Graham, who's our planning director and just waving at you, he's going to invigilate the questions and then ask you to ask your question at the end of each talk. So if you could save them all to the end of each individual talk, that would be great. The other thing to say is that this meeting will be recorded, so that we'll then be able to distribute it to people who are unable to attend, and obviously that would be helpful for them. We've got 3 talks. We've got Sarah Whiteley, who's our Senior Historic Environment Officer, and she's going to talk about archaeology in the planning process. We've got Peter Reynolds, who's waving as well, who's going to talk about building conservation in the planning process. And finally, last but not least, Peter Stockton, who's Head of Sustainable Development, who's going to give an update on the local plan. So obviously all of these things are very relevant to when in parishes, and I'm a parish councillor as well, so I know exactly what it's like in a protected landscape, particularly difficult extra considerations to be made. And hopefully this will help to inform you and me about how we should go about our business. So without further ado, unless anybody's got anything they want to ask immediately, let me introduce Sarah Whiteley, who, as I said, is the Senior Historic Environment Officer, and she's going to talk about archaeology and the planning process. Sarah, over to you.
Right, I'll just see if I can share my screen. Here we go. Right, can everyone see that? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to talk about archaeology in the planning process, but I'm also going to talk quite a bit about something that underpins all our consultation work, and it's the historic environment record for the national park. It's very much integral to the development control process, as it is to all the other work that we do and the work of other people within the who actually, you know, come into the national park to do research, you know, and just generally enjoy the historic environment. So we'll start with a kind of overview of what historic environment records are and a bit of the history about them as well. So basically, a HER, Historic Environment Record, is a database of information on archaeological and historic sites, features, structures and finds. They can also include information on historic landscape character, historic parks and gardens, and aspects of the natural environment, such as ancient woodlands. They are usually maintained by local government bodies, including county and district councils, unitary authorities, and national parks. HERs are dynamic databases which are constantly being added to, and I'll describe this process in more detail later in the presentation. So how and why did HERs develop? Systematic records of archaeological and historic monuments began to be created in 1908 when the Royal Commissions on historic monuments for England, Scotland and Wales were set up and instructed to make an inventory of the ancient and historical monuments of their respective countries. For example, the warrant for the Royal Commission of Historic Monuments for England required the Commission to make an inventory of the ancient monuments and constructions connected with or illustrative of the contemporary culture, civilization, and conditions of life of people in England, covering the period from the earliest time to the year 1700. In fact, the Ordnance Survey had been depicting antiquities on maps since 1791. And from the 1920s, its archaeology division developed a card index system, and a network of local correspondents provided this with information. Local records of field monuments and finds, often based on information collected by these correspondents, began to be developed by many museums. During the 1960s, there was a growing awareness of the rate at which archaeological sites were being damaged or destroyed by development and agriculture, and a need for information amassed by the Royal Commissions and the Ordnance Survey to be available to local authority in the local authority planning system. The Committee of Inquiry into the Arrangements for the Protection of Field Monuments, the Walsh Committee, which covered England, Wales and Scotland, recommended the strengthening of existing legislation for the protection of ancient monuments, and concluded that the local authority system could in future play a vital part in identifying and moderating threats to the historic landscape. It recommended that county planning authorities maintain a record of field monuments, and that county councils should consider appointing archaeological officers to provide professional archaeological assistance. And following the publication of the Walsh Report, a national network of archaeological officers began to emerge in England and Wales in the 1970s. In national parks, the establishment of archaeological officers happened slightly later. Here, Robert White was the first archaeological officer to be appointed by the authority in 1988. At this time, he was responsible for persuading the Royal Commission for England to make the Yorkshire Dales a pilot project for an uplands mapping project using aerial photography. The extensive database of newly recorded archaeological sites resulting from this work being the basis of the current historic environment record. From the initial work of Robert White, the database has now grown into a sophisticated and extensive digital database linked to two geographical information systems. It now features in excess of 45,000 records and over 10,000 records of recorded events and historic landscape character information, as well as individual archaeological and historic sites and finds. This information is made up of designated heritage assets, including scheduled monuments, listed buildings and registered parks and gardens. Information from large-scale projects such as the original Uplands Mapping Project and subsequent such study, which was funded recently by Historic England to enhance the HER for the Westmoreland Dales, part of the National Park, which was based on both the study of aerial photography and LiDAR imagery. It also features information from projects generated by the National Heritage Lottery Fund, for instance, the Westmoreland Dales Landscape Partnership, which included a project that recorded what we called small-scale heritage features, things like clapper bridges, churn stands and gate stoops, the sort of things that people are familiar with in their villages, but they don't necessarily notice them, which means that sometimes they can go without any, recourse to the local, community. Now, if these things are on the HER and there's a consultation from a highways authority, we can highlight these features and make sure that they're safe. So it's really important to have these sorts of records. Similarly, the Westmoreland Dales. There was a Barnes recording project. All those enhanced records went onto the HER and work on individual archaeological sites. It also features projects relating to the work of independent archaeological groups and universities, and grey literature from developer-funded projects resulting from the requirement of the planning process. and portable antiquities, including finds by metal detectorists and other individual finds from and sites that are reported by members of the public. Digital information is mapped on a bespoke HER package called Heros. This is a live database to which all new information is added. We also have a static set of information in the National Park's QGIS system, which is a geographical information system, which makes viewing the HER data against historic mapping, aerial photography and LiDAR much more rapid and clear. We also have an extensive collection of hard copy project reports, photographs and slides, parish files, and a library of relevant publications. So how do we actually use the HER? Nationally, they're used for quite a wide range of purposes. These include advancing knowledge and understanding of the historic environment by a range of parties, including students, members of the public, schools, academics and commercial organisations, informing strategic policies and decision-making relating to local plans, neighbourhood plans and land management, informing the development management process, decisions and streamlining the planning process, supporting heritage-led regeneration, environmental improvement and cultural tourist initiatives, supporting conservation management, enhancement and protection of historic sites and monuments, informing countryside management such as woodland creation, land management and moorland management plans, and contributing to research, education and social inclusion. Also for promoting public participation in the exploration, appreciation and enjoyment of local heritage. The Yorkshire Dales HER is used for all these functions at various times, but I wanted to focus now on one of the most important aspects of its use, the planning process. Since 1990 and the publication of Planning Policy Guidance Note 16, Archaeology and Planning, archaeology has been recognised as a material consideration in making planning decisions and the key role of the historic environment records in this process. At this point, the data collection at that point, the data collections that became HERs were largely sites and monuments records, focusing on archaeological sites, monuments and finds. Subsequently, more integrated databases started to be developed, integrating information on historic buildings, parks and gardens, ancient woodlands and marine archaeology. They also became linked to digital mapping software as the norm. And this type of database is known as a historic environment record. Following the publication of the planning guidance in the 1990s, saw a significant rise in the number of archaeological projects carried out in response to the development proposals. This increased both the amount of information entering HERs and the demand for that information from users. Consequence of the planning guidance was competitive tendering for archaeological projects, and it's now normal for a number of archaeological contractors, which are independent companies, to compete for work in any area. This has emphasised the importance of HERs and as a central access point for information. Subsequently, in 2012, the PPG 16 and PPG 15 that related to the historic built environment was absorbed into the National Planning Policy Framework, becoming Chapter 16, Conserving and Enhancing the Historic Environment. A key paragraph in this section is this one, which requires developers to demonstrate that they've identified the significance of any heritage assets which are going to be affected by any developments, and that they've used the correct sources for to assess the significance of any potential sites that are going to be affected by development. Obviously, they have to have at least consulted the historic environment record, and where necessary have commissioned professional archaeologists to undertake further detailed studies of any sites that are going to be affected. This can involve preparing a desk-based assessment of the site and where necessary, and quite often field evaluation to find out what's actually there. So within the planning guidance, significance of heritage assets has been formally defined, and heritage assets are the term we use for any sort of archaeological, historic building, site, or anything that has some historical and archaeological interest, based on our assessment in the planning process, is considered to be a heritage asset, whether it's designated, that means it's protected as a listed building or a scheduled monument, or non-designated, meaning that it's essentially been, that it's on the HER, or it's been recognised as part of the planning process, part of a planning assessment, to be a feature of some significance, which needs assessment and is a material consideration in the planning process, essentially. And just to illustrate this, I wanted to give a couple of casework examples. This is a recent case that we dealt with in Halton Gill, which is in Littondale. It first came to our attention in 2023. The application being for the erection of a communications tower, Halton Gill above Littondale. Early in October of that year, the Historic Environment team were consulted on the application, and in checking the HER data of the proposed development site, it was noted that it corresponded to an HER entry for a field system and a possible Iron Age Romano-British enclosed settlement. Now you can see this on this aerial photograph. You've got the enclosed settlement here, and then associated field systems as earthworks in the right across this land parcel, and going further up the dale as well. The actual development site was just here on the very edge of this complex. We visited the site to just check what the conditions on the ground were like, and there were clear earthwork features surviving. And then my colleague Doug Mitcham did some LiDAR analysis of the site and did this processing, which actually shows the earthworks and the related sort of complex much more clearly. And the actual development site was in this area where you can obviously see there are some earthworks. So, having confirmed that there was definitely some there's going to be some archaeological impact through this development, we requested that a predetermination archaeological field evaluation of the site be undertaken. And this is in line with the requirements of the National Planning Policy Framework paragraph, which I talked about earlier. We needed to find out more about the features that were going to be impacted by the development, so that we could make a decision about whether the development should go ahead at all in this location, and the nature of scale of any mitigation for the damage to the remains that the development would cause. We were lucky that the developer commissioned a very good archaeological consultancy, AOC Archaeology. They were determined that they wanted to build on this site. So we basically said, well, we really need a very, very thorough evaluation of it, so that we completely understand what the impact of this work's going to be on the significance of the remains that are there. So AOC did a desk-based assessment. They did measured earthwork survey, and they did 3 sorts of geophysics, which is basically using different techniques to assess what's under the ground without breaking the ground. So if you've seen Time Team, that's resistivity and magnetometry, and also ground penetrating radar. So they really threw the kitchen sink at the evaluation of this, which we were really pleased with, because it did mean that we definitely were, it was confirmed that there was archaeological potential under the ground, as well as the earthworks that we could see on the site. So following those levels of evaluation, we asked that there be a further stage of trial trenching. This is the trial trenching plan on the measured survey results that we got from the work that AOC did. That's the footprint of the communications tower and its infrastructure. So basically, we asked them to sample by means of essentially digging trenches across a range of the features that were going to be impacted. So we've got something that looks like a house or hut circle just there, a mound feature, some linears here. Weren't quite sure what was going on, bit of a trackway there, but that's why you've got to, if the site's going to be developed, you do need to know what's under the ground so that you can then scope a further level of mitigation through either preservation in situ, through some sort of change to the design of the development, or preservation by record, which essentially in this case, it meant actually excavating the site. So this is the results, some of the results of that trial trenching. So we've got a sort of curving wall feature here. We've got a stone that was very sort of flattened on its top. It looked as though it had been used for possibly using a quern stone for grinding against it or some sort of industrial process. This trench shows a little bit of a wall at the back. You've also got some flat stones which depict what we think was a flagstone floor. Now this is the same age as a site that was depicted on one of the images that I showed earlier, which showed a guy standing on a step ladder, and that was somebody from Sheffield University, Andrew Fleming, in the 1980s. He dug a Romano-British settlement site at Helaw in Swaledale, and the remains here very, very similar. So having got all the results back from all the field evaluation, and the company was still determined to go ahead, we made a decision to allow to recommend approval of the development, with mitigation being a full excavation of the footprint of the communications tower enclosure. We were in two minds, because these are very well preserved earthworks, which probably would be scheduled anywhere else but the Yorkshire Dales. But the Yorkshire Dales is so rich in surviving earthwork archaeology, a lot of things aren't scheduled when probably they should be. But because of the location of this, it's right at the tail end of these earthworks, we decided that it was probably worthwhile to let the developer pay for the mitigation. We were going to learn an awful lot about the archaeology of this nature through very, very detailed excavation. And we thought that sort of offset really the loss of significance of that part of the site. So this picture shows the excavations towards the end of the project. This was undertaken between October and December last year. It was completely dug by hand because the archaeology was so close to the surface you couldn't strip it using a machine, which is often the case because you would have taken away the remains. So this was all done by hand. The company that did it were absolutely brilliant. They kept the same people on the project right from the word go. So they all knew it. They knew it from the evaluation stages. And they were all very committed and interested in what they were doing, which is a real boon, because that's not always the case. And I know this isn't the largest of photographs, but you can get a hint here of a big curving sort of curb, which we think was part of the foundations of a roundhouse. There's also evidence of flooring, again, that sort of flagstone floor, which we saw in the evaluation trenches. And something that was really quite nice in this area, there's a little collection of quern stones. They're sort of prehistoric grinding stones. Some of these were broken, and it looked as though they might have been placed there in a sort of ritual deposit, possibly when the house was abandoned, because we quite often see that in prehistoric houses, particularly sort of Bronze Age structures. There's often deposits in the in the sort of doorways. That can be artifacts, or it can be sort of buried animals like dogs and things like that. So that was really nice. And so that work finished in December, excuse me, and it's now at the post-excavation phase. So we're really looking forward to the reporting on that and the results of all the analysis of the bones and the finds and the deposits that were sampled. It's really exciting, and it gives us a sort of insight into some of the other similar sorts of sites that have been looked at in the Dales, but not to that level of detail. Sorry, I've gone on a bit on that one. And then finally, I just wanted to give another example, which is fairly close to my heart because it's West Whitton, where I live. But just again to sort of illustrate the process of assessing archaeology and sort of heritage assets in the planning process. This application was for the extension of this holiday park, and they wanted to put some more units in this field and in this one here. And you can see on the aerial photograph that there are sort of slight lines in this field, and basically there's surviving ridge and furrow earthworks, which represent sort of medieval agricultural practices, usually as a result of ploughing with oxen. And they sort of complement the medieval field pattern that you've got here, the sort of medieval strip fields. So whilst this sort of archaeology is relatively common in the Dales, it does mean that the land hasn't been ploughed for many hundreds of years. So there can be other features kind of surviving underneath. So in this particular case, I'll just show what the developers wanted to do. So this is the field next to the existing caravan site. So they were going to put in 5 units there, 5 units there, landscaping and a sort of infrastructure of trackways and things. So essentially all those areas, the archaeology in them would have gone essentially. So it was really important that we asked for at least some level of assessment, which I did. I asked for a geophysical survey, but there was quite a local sort of outcry about this proposal because it's considered really that the holiday park is probably big enough already. It's almost, in terms of units and individuals, they're the same size as the actual village. So there was a big sort of outcry from local people, and the developers ultimately withdrew the application. So that was quite interesting because we never got the geophysical survey, which was a shame. But that would have been the next stage in the process, and had that shown any evidence of below ground archaeology, we would have asked for that to be evaluated by means of trial trenching as well. I'm not quite sure how long I've spoken for, but basically that was all I'd got to say on this. Just wondered if anyone's got any questions, or if we're going to perhaps leave that until later on. I don't know.
Well, so just while people are thinking what they might ask, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is there any difference now because of the new planning process in terms of preserving or examining historical elements in the landscape?
Because of the revision to the recent revision to NPPF,
yes.
And not that I'm aware of, no.
And just as a supplement to that, maybe is the process any different in the national park to elsewhere?
No, it's not. No. We just work under the auspices of NPPF essentially, and policies in the emerging local plan kind of reflect that as well. So no, I mean, obviously, because of the protected status of the national park, there's more sort of potential for interest surviving because there's been less intensive agriculture and development. But I think that's possibly only difference. But in terms of the planning process, that's not any different, really.
Richard, is there anybody else that wants to ask a question? Any questions? Oh, here we are. I think somebody's typing.
Just while they type, I'll ask a question, or two questions actually, Sarah. One, how can parish councils find out what sort of heritage
Sorry,
assets
yes.
they've got in their parishes.
Yeah.
And then secondly, if you can just explain what LiDAR is as
Oh,
well.
right. Okay. Well, I'll do LiDAR first. Basically, LiDAR is laser measurements from the air of the ground. So they're very, very fine scale readings, essentially, which will give you an idea of what's even under tree cover, any sort of variations in the ground, which means that you get very sort of you get higher definition of earthwork features than you would from an aerial photograph. So the two sources of data really complement each other, but LiDAR, now that LiDAR can be processed to very sort of a very high degree, as my colleague had done for that site at Littondale, that's become really useful. And in terms of finding out, parish councils, if they want to find out what heritage assets of all sorts there are in their areas, then come to us at the Historic Environment Record, because as I said in the presentation, the Historic Environment Record is kind of the main source of that sort of data. There are other sources. There's something called the Heritage Gateway, which Historic England maintain, but that's just not as up to date. That's just a fairly sort of static record, whereas we continue to curate and kind of add to the database that's maintained by the authority.
So we've got to go. Sorry, Richard, do you want to take the
no, by all means, you do
it,
Andrew.
So we've got a couple of questions now, which we'll take very quickly, because otherwise we'll run out of time at the end.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's very interesting. Debbie McCall, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Is that possible? No? Shall I ask on your behalf? So Debbie's asked, as a parish council, when we get a planning application, how do we know if a survey needs doing?
Well, I think there are certain types of development which nearly always will need some level of scrutiny in terms of sort of the historic environment, and that's usually things that are going to involve a significant ground disturbance, like like a small scale housing development, horse riding menages, things like that, tennis courts, anything that's going to involve significant ground disturbance. It's always worth kind of flagging that up to us. I mean, those sorts of things I should be consulted on internally. But you can't always guarantee that. So yeah, it's that sort of, and also obviously local knowledge as well. If somebody knows something about a particular site or building that's going to be the subject of development, then by all means, just get in touch and we'll screen it, because it's that means that helps us do our job really.
Fine. And then actually, Andy Sellers has asked, do sites have to be on the HER for developers to take notes, and how are sites added to the historical environment record? Actually, it was a sort of question I was going to ask, because it seems that some of them you'd only discover if somebody puts in a planning application to build on it.
That's exactly it, and that's quite a legitimate. If we feel that something could be deemed a heritage asset on the basis of field observations, or the location that it's in. It might be a village green in a medieval village that isn't on the HER as a particular site, but if that's developed, there's going to be archaeology. And there was a case relatively recently at Nateby, an extension to a garage forecourt, and that was a village green, and there was archaeology. So yeah, it's a bit of a sort of detective process in some respects. So was there another question? Sorry, you're muted.
I think that's all.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, no, there is just one more from Andy. Is it important for parish councils to advise the National Park Authority of a site? And I would have thought the answer is yes.
Definitely, yes. Yeah.
Good. Well, thanks ever so much, Sarah. We'll move on. That was very interesting, and we'll move on to Peter Reynolds, who's the senior listed buildings officer, who's going to talk about the building conservation and the planning process, that rather difficult issue often. Peter.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen now. There we go. Can everyone see my screen? Excellent. So good evening. My name is Peter Reynolds. I'm the Senior Listed Buildings Officer at the Yorkshire Dales National Park Authority. I also work as the authority's Building Conservation Officer, and I've been asked to speak to you about the role of building conservation within the planning system. So in this presentation, we're going to cover some of the essential aspects of building conservation. We'll look at some of the different types of heritage asset, including both designated and non-designated assets. We'll visit the role of building conservation in planning and at some of the main threats to historic buildings, as well as some opportunities for enhancement. We'll also have a look at a few case studies at the end where building conservation has played a part in the planning process. And finally, we'll cover the role that parish councils can play in building conservation on a local level. So built heritage makes a huge contribution towards the special qualities of the national park in terms of its beauty, of its cultural and historical significance, its economic value, and in the way that it can be experienced and enjoyed by members of the public. Historic buildings encapsulate aspects of the history and the traditions and the culture of people spanning many generations. And good building conservation can add value to places and properties. It can help to make communities vibrant, interesting, and high-quality places to live. Historic buildings are a finite resource. Once they're gone for good. So it's important to conserve and protect them, not only for ourselves, but for future generations to enjoy. So in terms of some of the types of heritage asset that I work with in my roles, firstly, we'll cover listed buildings. So these are nationally designated for their special architectural or historical interests. Listed buildings can also include some structures such as telephone kiosks or bridges or other features like milestones and lime kilns. There are 3 grades of listing in England. Grade 1, which is buildings of exceptional interest, and only around 2.5% of all listed buildings meet this grade. Grade 2 star, which are buildings of more than special interest, and they represent about 5 or 6% of all listed buildings. And then the remainder, the vast majority of listed buildings are grade 2 listed, and this is the most likely grade of listing for a homeowner. So the National Heritage List for England is largely administered by Historic England, but the Secretary of State generally has the final say in determining which buildings are designated as listed buildings. Decision-making for listed building consent applications generally falls to the local planning authority, except in certain cases, such as where ecclesiastical exemption applies to a church building, for example. So there are currently 2,141 listed buildings in the national park. Listing protects the whole of the listed building, including its exterior, its interior, and any fixtures or fittings, and also pre-1948 structures within the listed building's curtilage. It's a legal requirement to get listed building consent for any alterations or works of demolition that would affect the special character of a listed building, and the carrying out of any such works without consent is a criminal offence. An exception can be made under certain circumstances for works that are urgently necessary in the interest of health or safety or for the immediate preservation of the building. Next, we'll look at conservation areas. So a conservation area is an area of special architectural or historical interest, the character, appearance or setting of which it's desirable to preserve or enhance. So unlike listed buildings, they're normally designated by the local planning authority itself, and they can cover a much greater area. The Yorkshire Dales National Park Authority currently has 47 designated conservation areas, including the 2 largest by area in the country, which are the Swaledale and Narkengarthdale and the Littondale Barns and Walls conservation areas. We also have the longest, or part of the longest, which is the Settle to Carlisle Railway conservation area. There's also a proposal in at the moment to adopt Mask as the 48th conservation area, and a public consultation is well underway with that now. So in terms of planning, there's no such thing as conservation area consent anymore. This process was streamlined and combined with the more general planning application system. Conservation area status brings some additional planning controls in terms of permitted development rights, although given the existing national park protection of the Yorkshire Dales, these additional controls are largely limited to demolition of walls over a certain height and the demolition of buildings over a certain area within a conservation area. Conservation area status also brings some protection over felling or lopping of trees over a certain size. So the National Park, as a local planning authority, has a duty to, from time to time, review the boundaries of conservation areas within its area and to carry out character appraisals and management plans. Non-designated heritage assets are buildings, monuments, structures or sites which have been identified as having a degree of significance meriting consideration in planning decisions because of their historical interest, but which have not been formally designated. They can vary greatly in significance, to being of minor interest only, to being of equivalent or near equivalent significance to a designated heritage asset, such as a listed building. Non-designated assets can be identified by the local planning authority during the planning process, or they can be identified as part of a historic environment record or a local list. So whilst there's no additional legal protection over covering works to non-designated heritage assets, and typically there's no planning control over works to the interior of non-designated buildings, there are some measures which can be taken by local planning authorities where an asset is considered to be of sufficient historical interest to warrant designation. For example, a local planning authority can serve a building preservation notice where an unlisted building is at risk of demolition or development which would harm its special interest. And this process protects the whole of the building for a period of up to 6 months, during which time Historic England can assess whether the building should be listed formally. So in my role as the Senior Listed Buildings Officer, I get consulted on planning and listed building consent applications, and I provide comments to the planning officer, assessing the significance of the building or site, assessing the impact of proposals upon that significance, and where possible, helping to find a way forward where there's a conflict between the conservation of the asset and the proposed works of the development. So I engage with applicants, agents, architects and colleagues on applications and on pre-application inquiries. That can include going out on site to inspect buildings, where necessary, providing verbal and written advice where relevant, and I also provide specialist input for planning appeals when and where necessary. So part of my other role, my Building Conservation Officer role, I'm involved with administering and managing the authority's listed buildings at risk register, carrying out conservation area appraisals, with planning applications and inquiries affecting non-designated assets and conservation areas. I'm involved with grant funding projects for repairs and restoration works to historic buildings, and keeping relevant parts of the historic environment record up to date, amongst many other tasks. So when an application comes through to me for consultation, my first task normally is to assess the significance of the building or structure, taking into account all information available. So this will include the heritage statement provided by the applicant, any available photographs of the site that we have on records, historic Ordnance Survey map progression, information contained in our historic environment records, or within a conservation area appraisal where we have one for the site. I'll also often go out on site to inspect a building or site, especially when more information is needed or I need to assess the impact of works upon its setting. Where a heritage statement provided by an applicant provides inadequate information, we can also get back to the applicant to request more detail proportionate to the significance of the asset. So my comments and input to an application will seek to conserve and, where possible, enhance the significance of the heritage asset in line with development plan policies and the National Planning Policy Framework. These comments will be taken into account as part of the decision-making process by the officer or the planning committee members. I'll also look for opportunities to add value to the proposal through conservation, to find solutions to barriers where possible. But if a proposal fundamentally conflicts with planning policy in terms of its impact on the heritage asset and there's no viable way to resolve that conflict through negotiation, then I will object to the proposal. So there are many threats and challenges to historic buildings within the national park. Most historic buildings within the park are of traditional solid stone masonry construction with lime mortar, meaning they're designed to be vapor permeable and to breathe to enable moisture to pass through the fabric. However, increasingly over the last century, incompatible modern materials and finishes, including cement and damp-proof membranes and other impermeable finishes, have been applied to many traditional buildings, and this can cause long-term damage to fabric and often results in moisture becoming trapped within buildings. Unsympathetic developments and alterations can be very damaging to historic building significance, whether this be an extension that overwhelms the main building, an intervention which results in demolition or harm to historic fabric, the introduction of inappropriate or incongruous features, or a proposed new use which is incompatible with the existing building's layout. Fundamentally, it's vital that every application for consent or permission is adequately informed by a thorough heritage statement, and that proposals work with the building's properties and significance rather than against them. Other factors which can harm historic buildings include the increasing effects of climate change, for example, increased flood risk in certain areas. Unmanaged vegetation growth on or near structures can be a big threat, as can neglect or a prolonged period of vacancy. And more often than not, the most effective way to conserve a historic building is to keep it in a viable and compatible use. The requirements of modern living can also put increased pressure on historic building fabric. For example, expectations that houses should be now fully waterproofed, requirements in terms of thermal efficiency, fire safety, insulation, and expectations that family homes should have enough room, enough bathrooms. Appliances like washing machines can generate huge amounts of moisture. Even changes in how frequently windows are left open can all have an impact on historic buildings. Conversely, development proposals can be an opportunity to enhance the significance or character of a historic building. There can be an opportunity to reverse previous harmful or unsympathetic works to a building, and to employ more traditional materials and methods where appropriate, such as using hot lime instead of cement pointing to improve the performance and the appearance of the building. It could be an opportunity to better understand how the building performs and functions and to carry out works holistically to make it more thermally efficient and a more pleasant place to use or inhabit. It can be a way to reintroduce features which are distinctive to the local area, such as a particular style of coping stone to a boundary wall, to ensure that the sense of local distinctiveness is not lost or diluted over time. We can use development proposals as an opportunity to record or discover more about a building's past, for example, through archaeological monitoring or excavation works under modern floors. We can look at how to retain significant features which give an indication of the building's historical use, and to enhance our understanding and appreciation of its past. For example, retaining old stone floors or timber stalls within a barn conversion, which can add hugely to the character of the building. We can also look at ways of how to adapt historic buildings to provide biodiversity enhancement. So, for example, using bat-friendly roof insulation materials or creating additional safe habitats as part of re-roofing works. So the first example I'm going to show you is that of Low Whiter in Grinton Parish at Swaledale. So this site consists of 2 ranges of farmhouse with associated agricultural buildings. And it first came to my attention, or the authorities' attention, in August 2018, when an application for full planning permission was received for reoccupation of a former dwelling and conversion of outbuildings to form additional accommodation. At this time, neither of the building ranges at Low Whiter was designated as a listed building. However, it was very clear from the outset that these buildings were very special. They contained significant historical and archaeological fabric and were potentially of comparable significance to other listed buildings within the area. So as a result of their obvious significance and the threat to the buildings through the proposed development, the decision was made by the authority to serve a building preservation notice on these buildings. And this immediately protected them from harmful alterations, both external and internal. And concurrently, an application was submitted to Historic England for both building ranges to be listed. We also requested more thorough and comprehensive details from the applicant as part of a revised heritage statement to help us more fully understand the significance of the buildings. So the result of the notice was that the applications for listing were successful, and both ranges have each been designated at Grade 2 star. that happened in May 2019. This ensured that listed building consent was applied for, allowing us to give much greater weight to the preservation and the recording of features and the conservation of the newly listed buildings as part of the consent process. So these photos are of the western range at Low Whiter, with the front elevation showing the top left, including a range of datable 17th century doors and chamfered windows, and also evidence of alterations to the building associated with its historical conversion into a barn once it was redundant as a house. So documentary evidence links this building to a yeoman farmer called James Hurd in 1680, which exactly matches the date on a door lintel to the front elevation. There's a complex phasing within the masonry, such as the clear lower eaves level shown in the rear elevation shown in the bottom right, indicating that the range was originally a crook-framed longhouse of 16th or early 17th century origin, with the byre and house under one roof. Internally, there are many significant features, including graffiti and apotropaic marks in the upstairs lime plaster work and on door frames. And there was an inscribed mantelpiece with the surname Close shown in the bottom left, and this relates to the family known to the Close family, who are known to have occupied the building from the 17th to the mid 19th century. And then to the top right is shown a smaller detached outbuilding within the curtilage of the building, which includes a very, very clear thatch line in its gable wall. So these photos are of the East Range at Low Whiter. They show recent works following consent to repoint externally in lime mortar, and carry out other renovation and restoration works of the building range. So to the gable wall shown in the centre is another very, very clear thatch line, giving evidence of the farmhouse's 17th century origins. The front elevation was refronted in the mid to late 18th century, and further alterations were made to the range in the 19th century as part of the use of the building as a butter factory. So the room shown in the top right picture was part of this butter factory. You can see some of the stone shelves on the left-hand side. In front of this room, there's a little outbuilding known as the gig house shown in the bottom right. This contains a cart store with an adjacent loading room to the first floor, and a small milking parlour and a room with basins. You can see that in the bottom left picture. And these were likely, we think they were likely used for washing cheesecloths. So the obvious advantage of having served a preservation notice and the subsequent listing of these buildings is that this important evidence of their past use is now legally protected, and their preservation and recording can be required as part of development moving forward. So the next example I'm going to show you is a Grade 2 listed former coach house in Gammersgill. So following a long period of disuse, this building had become derelict and was classed as being at risk on the authorities' buildings at risk register. So this photograph shows the front of the building in 2016. It's likely early 19th century date. It would historically have served the main house, Rivermead, which is itself separately listed. The only existing openings to this building were to the front elevation, with the cart shed and workshop to the ground floor, and two small rooms above accessed by external steps. So planning permission and listed building consent were granted in 2016 for the conversion of the coach house to form additional accommodation to the main house. So the photo on the left is of the building during conservation works in 2024. Given the small size of the building, the lack of existing openings to 3 of its 4 elevations, and the lack of an existing internal staircase, careful thought had to be given as to how to make best use of the existing layout and openings of the building without causing harm to any significant fabric. So the approved conversion plans shown on the right of this slide show that the only new opening approved was a discrete door to the rear elevation, and that the internal cells of the building were kept with minimal alterations to their layout. So this development has brought the building back into incompatible use, and as a result, the building has recently been taken off the at-risk register. The last case study I'm going to show you is Slatonburgh Farmhouse near Ingleton. This is again listed at Grade 2. It's probably late 17th or very early 18th century in dates, refronted in the late 18th or early 19th century, and it has an adjoining cottage to the west, which is included in the listing. So it was another building at risk, with the West Cottage having been derelict since at least 1988, the date of listing. And you can see there the damage and the loss of historical door and window surrounds, and a big hole in the elevation, which was infilled by a previous owner with crude brickwork and blockwork, just to try and shore it up against the weather. So this is the same building following extensive pre-application discussions between the owner and the authority, and the granting of listed building consent in 2019 for repair of the damaged sections of masonry, and re-roofing and reinstating of damaged or missing features and openings. So this photograph shows the listed building following completion of those repair works, with it having been removed from the buildings at risk register. Rebuilding was carried out in a sympathetic manner, using local stone and traditional lime mortar. Some of the missing or damaged window and door surrounds were reinstated as part of reconstructed openings. Salvaged historical stone slates from the building were used for the front roof slope, where they're most publicly visible, and reproduction art stone slates were used for the rear to make up the shortfall, whilst providing a sympathetic appearance. So most importantly, the listed building was made watertight, it was made structurally sound, and its further decline was prevented. And subsequent applications have been received seeking to put the repaired cottage back into use and to renovate it, which will ensure its longer-term conservation. So lastly, the Parish Council has an important part to play in the planning process where building conservation is concerned. They represent the local community, and their consultation responses do carry weight in planning decisions. Their input can be very valuable both in raising local concerns and opinions about a proposal, and in providing local knowledge about a site or a building which the authority might not be fully aware of, especially in the case of non-designated heritage assets of local significance. In the process of designating a new conservation area or adopting a new conservation area appraisal, the Parish Council is often very, very closely involved with the authority in providing input, fielding comments from members of the community, being involved in the public consultation, as is the case with Mask at the moment. Indeed, the initial request to designate a conservation area or carry out an appraisal or a boundary review very often comes from the local Parish Council. So to summarise, the input of the Parish Council can enhance our understanding of historic buildings and sites. It can add value to the planning process where conservation is involved, and it can give local communities a greater sense of involvement and ownership for conservation areas. Thank you very much for your time. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Peter. That was very interesting. Just while there is a question just being typed as we speak, just while that's happening, I mean, it's interesting to see that by enhancing the historic buildings, you actually preserve them. In other words, it's really quite important that they're developed, obviously appropriately.
Absolutely,
and it's preservation.
Yeah, it's not always possible. Not every building or structure has a viable reuse, but if one can be found, then often, yeah, that is the best way to secure its long-term conservation and incentivize its sort of maintenance and keeping it in use.
So here we go. So Dave Donkin asks, is the National Park Authority aware of telephone boxes being removed by BT, and is this a concern?
Yes, and in fact, we've received concerns about telephone box in Gale, a listed one, which has come to my attention. So there's been a notice put up by BT. It happens from time to time. They'll put a notice up in the window of a K6 kiosk, saying they're going to remove a listed building, and we'll have to write to them and remind them that it is a criminal offence to do that it is protected, and and I will be writing to BT shortly to make them aware of that particular case. It's something it's a bit of an ongoing battle, really. Unfortunately, not all telephone kiosks are listed, so those that aren't listed, they don't benefit from the same level of protection. We did apply to list quite a lot of them. We were successful in some cases and unsuccessful in others. So really, yeah, it depends on how the box is listed as to whether we can step in and prevent them from removing them or damaging them.
I think Dave might have a follow-up, but in the meantime, Nicola has asked, oh, this is quite contentious. Well, it can be contentious.
Okay.
Are the national parks pro buildings being developed for accommodation? Answer that if you can.
Accommodation.
Peter.
Well, I mean, so there's obviously the conversion of traditional buildings policies in the current local plan, which give flexibility for a range of uses for suitable barns in suitable locations and other traditional buildings. So yes, we're supportive of the right building in the right location being put into an appropriate new use. The intensity of the use is key here, as well as the sort of landscape setting of the building. And for example, an isolated field barn in Upper Swaledale, in the wrong context with no suitable track up to it, the amount of work, intrusive work, that's going to impact on the landscape and the setting of that building, the harm that would cause would probably outweigh the benefit that we would get from creating a new house or a new, from getting a new use into that remote building. So it really has to be informed by the site, the suitability of the building and of the site, and the new use that they want to put it into.
Dave has followed up actually, asking, shouldn't all telephone boxes be listed? We've just lost one in Kingsley.
My own personal opinion is that all, one K6 box is as significant as the rest, really. However, in the listing guidance that Historic England uses and the Secretary of State uses, basically with K6 boxes, which are by far the most common listed telephone box in England, they tend to look for a significant grouping of other listed buildings in close proximity to that box. So you'll tend to find that the ones that are listed or that get newly listed are ones that are in a group with other listed buildings. Unfortunately, those that aren't in a sort of in that situation or aren't considered to be landmarks, the applications don't tend to be as successful.
Thank you very much, Peter. We'll move on to the last talk, which is from Peter Stockton, Head of Sustainable Development, talking about local plan update. Obviously, the local plan together with the management plan are, I don't know what the sort of Bibles of how the Park Authority works. And Peter's going to just update us on where we are with our new local plan.
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening, everyone. Yes, I'm Peter Stockton. I head up a small team that's working on the local plan review for the national park. I'll just share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
So let me start. Okay, here we go. Right. Okay. So just a quick reminder, if one is needed, about what local plans are and what they do. So perhaps their main function is as a criteria to guide planning applications, and that is intended to be for the benefit of people, the economy and the environment. They're also intended to play a bit more of a proactive role and identify new sites for development where we need that. So specifically new sites for housing, but also jobs and businesses as well. The other role of the local plan, and it's quite an important role, I suppose, within the national park, is to protect vulnerable sites and important sites from development. So particularly we're thinking here wildlife sites, heritage sites. We've talked about conservation areas and listed buildings and scheduled monuments, but also to protect the landscape as well from harm. The national park is essentially and originally a landscape designation, so the role of the local plan is to try to conserve that and fit development into that landscape. Another role of local plan is to support other strategies as well. So not necessarily our own strategies, but these can be strategies of partner organisations. So that could be the housing strategies of Westmorland and Furness and North Yorkshire. Also, it could be the National Park Management Plan strategies around farming and land management. It could be working with the local councils and the combined mayoral authorities on strategies around the rural economy, but also things like nature recovery as well, and sort of more recent issues around dark skies. And the other thing that the local plan is required to do as well is to try to conform with government planning policy, and to fit with the neighbouring local plans as well. So that's, in a nutshell, what the plan is doing. In terms of where are we at, so there's a very small team of us that have been working on this plan for 4 years, and we've reached the stage now where we've actually published the draft plan and the proposed housing sites during this spring. I'll come on to what happens next shortly, but the following stage is actually submitting the plan to the planning inspectorate for formal examination, and we're expecting that will happen this summer, and then hopefully we will get the inspector's report probably sometime next spring, and we can start to use the policies to guide planning applications, and hopefully see some movement on some of the allocated sites. So we're at publication. We're at quite an advanced stage now with the local plan. We've been at it for 4 or 5 years. We've got a lot of evidence, a lot of information about the policies. We've consulted on various occasions, and we've basically played our hand. We've published the plan that we think, as an authority, is sound. By sound, we mean sort of fit for purpose, and capable of delivering some of the objectives set for it, but also a plan that is legally compliant, i.e. that we've gone through the correct process, we've consulted people at the right time, we've undertaken the appraisals that we need to undertake, and we've engaged people correctly. So we've reached this formal stage, which is known as publication. It's also known amongst planners as kind of Regulation 19. That refers to a set of a legal set of regulations, and this is the opportunity really for people to send in their formal representations. So these might be representations in support of the plan, or they may be representations that object to parts of the plan. And really, from this stage, the authority sort of is kind of handing over control of the plan really to the kind of planning inspectorate. Our ability to kind of make changes from this stage are fairly limited now. We can only make minor changes to the plan, and it's up to the inspector to advise and to look at the evidence and to check and scrutinise whether the plan is going to be fit for purpose, and to hear what the sort of remaining objections to the plan are. So we're sort of passing that control, as it were, into the hands of a sort of independent person who has no specific involvement in the area, and they're kind of scrutinising it, sort of judging it independently. Which is, it's kind of long been a part of the kind of English planning process to do that. It's not particularly unusual in any way. It's just a part of the kind of scrutiny. The reason being, actually, that I suppose ultimately there's quite a lot of money at stake with planning. If you think about the kind of land values of land that will get planning permission or won't get planning permission, there's probably, if you add it all up, there's probably tens, even hundreds of millions of pounds at stake, not to mention the impacts on people's kind of lives and on the environment. So there, there can be quite high stakes that revolve around what the local plan says and what's in it. So from a parish council sort of parish meeting point of view, do you need to respond at this stage? Well, I think the answer is it depends whether there are bits of the plan that you want to support or bits of the plan that you wish to object to. Now, there might be elements of the plan that you want to support because it's delivering something that you feel is particularly important in your community. So there are communities in the national park that are very supportive of building more homes, and I would expect those communities to probably write in at this stage and say, yes, we think more houses should be built, and those parishes will be doing that because they might be expecting other parties to be objecting to some of those sites. So they're getting in with their viewpoint to kind of express what they think should happen. Now, we'll also have plenty of objections, I've no doubt. Hopefully not too many of those will come from parish councils, although no doubt some will. And this is the opportunity you have if you are wishing to formally object to the plan, to kind of write in and set out your reasons and what changes you think need to be made to the plan that would overcome your objection. So this might be parish councils, or it might be residents, or it might be amenity groups who perhaps disagree with the particular site that's being proposed for allocation for housing, for example. And it's the opportunity formally to say to the inspector and to the authority why you don't feel that site is suitable, and how your objection would be overcome, perhaps by taking the site out of the local plan, or making the authority think again about that. Now, submitting your objection to the inspector through the publication process may also eventually lead on to the inspector inviting an objector to attend a hearing session, which would be held probably in the autumn. And a hearing session is simply a kind of round table chaired discussion, chaired and led very much by the inspector, and inviting both parties, the National Park Authority on one side and the objector on the other, to kind of put their case and explain to the inspector what they feel their position is. The inspector will hear those arguments, will look at the evidence, will go away, consider them, and write a report. It may be, as a parish council, that the local plan has no or very little interest to you, and that's absolutely fine, in which case you don't need to do anything at this particular stage, or even subsequent stages if you have no interest in the plan itself. If you were to ask me which bits of the plan are likely to be of interest to parish councils and parish meetings, I would say hopefully by now you've perhaps got some indication from the previous consultation that we've been holding over the last couple of years, really, which hopefully have drawn your attention to any housing sites that we're proposing within your parish. The reason we're allocating sites at all is to try to get a mixture of affordable housing, which we definitely need, but also some new market homes as well, just to support local services such as schools, just to try to support the local economy, and to try to kind of reverse the kind of depopulation trend that we're seeing over the long period, which is not a good trend for the sustainability of communities in the park. So a little bit of managed housing can help with those to kind of address some of those issues. The other thing you'll probably be interested in will be the housing development boundaries, which were drawn around most of the settlements in the national park. They basically define areas where we would allow infill housing and where we generally wouldn't allow new build housing, although an exception might be made for what we call rural exceptions affordable housing. So those boundaries are quite important. No doubt you'll be interested to see whether we protected the correct open spaces, village greens, important recreational spaces within settlements, as well. Hopefully your councils will have had some involvement in that process over the last 4 or 5 years, kind of identifying places for particular protection from development. You may have, well, we've got 3 main employment sites that are allocated in the national park. So Threshold Quarry, Giggleswick Quarry, and the Balliol School site in Sedbergh. There are other smaller sites, but they're the kind of 3 main sites that we're trying to safeguard for future employment uses. We've already touched on the issue of reuse of existing buildings, such as stone barns, for new uses, such as housing, but it could also be other uses as well, such as employment uses or storage uses as well. If you represent a parish that has a high street, we've only really got 3, Sedbergh, Hawes and Grassington, you'll probably be interested in terms of change of use applications on that high street. So typically change of use of shops and retail uses to other non-retail uses, and what implication that has on the vitality and the viability of the high street. We have planning policies in the local plan about that. You may be interested to see the which parts of land in your area constitute what we're indicating to be the local ecological network. So the water corridors, the triple SIs, how they connect with each other, how wildlife moves between different sites. That's been mapped by the conservation, the wildlife conservation team. We've got a lot of detail about that, and we will look at that when we're looking at planning applications, how we can enhance that network. You may well be interested in policies around tourism development. So I know parish councils are interested in and have concerns about conversions of barns to new holiday lets, and that is being addressed in the new local plan. We are making that policy more restrictive than it currently is, so that might be something to look at. But also, I'm sure some communities have interest in caravan sites and the kind of appropriate the appropriate promotion, but also perhaps control of certain types of visitor and tourism developments. One of the main types of development that we deal with is agricultural development. So you may well be interested in looking at our policies on that, because they have changed subtly in that area. And then communities that have mineral working near them, predominantly Ribblesdale and Wharfdale, will be interested to see the direction of the policy on mineral working. So how do you make a representation at this stage? It is a more formal stage, but essentially it's a fairly easy process. You fill in a form. The form is online. It's on the local plan webpage. You provide some contact details. I'm afraid we can't accept representations which are anonymous. The inspector will not accept anonymous representation. So we do need some basic contact details. We will keep those. We will protect those as far as we can, but we cannot accept anonymous representations. And basically, you just tell us which bits of the plan you want to make a representation about, what you want to say about that area of policy or that map or that paragraph. If you're objecting, why you think that aspect of the plan is unsound, not suitable, or is not legally compliant, and what it would take essentially for you to remove your objection, i.e. what change needs to be made to the plan to overcome your objection, what modification needs to be made. we would ask, if you're making multiple representations, that you make a representation for each particular supportive statement or objection, and reference those to the paragraph map or the policy in the plan. And if you could do that by the 12th of noon on Tuesday, the 6th of May, that's quite important to kind of hit that deadline this time, because this is a formal stage, and the inspector will not accept representations received after that deadline. Getting towards the end now, what happens to the representations? Well, very quickly, we summarise them, we put them in a database. The authority considers them. The authority decides whether it's going to suggest to the inspector that we make minor modifications or possibly some major modifications to the plan. At this stage, we're quite keen to avoid major modifications, because that might entail a further period of public consultation if we have to go back and consult people about something significant that we're changing in the plan. So, for example, if we wanted to add a new housing site, I think that would be regarded as a major modification, and we would have to consult people about that. The representations and the authorities' suggested modifications are then passed on to the Planning Inspectorate in Bristol. The Planning Inspectorate will appoint an independent examiner, an inspector, whose job will then be to assess the soundness and legal compliance of the plan. That process will probably could take up to 4 or 5 months from start to finish. It's likely to involve some hearing sessions. Those are probably likely to be based at the National Park offices in Bainbridge, but they could also be virtual sessions as well. That will be up to the inspector to determine that. And then once the inspector has got all the evidence together, heard from everybody who wants to make comments, the inspector will write a report, and that will be published. From our point of view, we're hoping that he or she will find the plan to be sound, so probably subject to some modifications, but there is a risk to us that the inspector could find the plan to be unsound and send us back to a kind of earlier stage. We're hoping that isn't going to happen. The last slide is, how does all this relate to what's happening around the national park? How does it relate to the North Yorkshire, Westmorland and Furness and Lancaster local plans? So the 3 local councils on our edge are also preparing their own local plans for the areas outside the national park. You may have seen in the press that North Yorkshire and Westmorland and Furness have both undertaken their own call for housing sites and employment sites. Now, we did that back in, I think it was 2021, where we invited options for housing sites. North Yorkshire and Westmorland and Furness are doing the same. It's just that they're under a lot more pressure from government, and they're looking at much higher numbers than we are. Now, not all of the sites that that North Yorkshire have made public will find their way into the local plan. Indeed, many of them won't. But yeah, that they are looking at far greater levels of change than we are. At the end of the day, Yorkshire Dales remains a national park. It is a national designation, and the amount of development that we're looking at is going to be relatively modest. The scales of development are modest. Our population is modest. It covers a large area, but there is a strong emphasis on conservation and enhancement. So perhaps we're fortunate in not being under as much pressure as our neighbours are going to be. So I'll just finish off with this slide, which just on the right-hand side, you'll find hopefully everything you need to know about the local plan on our website, and you are more than welcome to ring us up and email us and ask any questions about the current publication stage or any aspect of the local plan. So I will finish there and hand back to Andrew
Thank you, Peter. So there was one question that asked what defines a formal presentation, but I think Andy said asked that before you'd actually got to that part of your talk, and was quite happy to withdraw that. But there was a question from Debbie McCall, which is quite pertinent, really. What is the feeling about large green energy installations, i.e. wind turbine farms or large solar panel farms? And I think we've just got time to answer that, Peter, and then we'll have to wind up.
Yeah, sorry, very quickly. The policy of the new plan essentially says no to large scale commercial solar, wind and other types of renewable energy. But in a change to policy, there is a scale below that where we are suggesting that we would look positively at community scale or business scale solar and wind as well. So there's a discussion to have of what that actually means. But if we're serious about decarbonising, then we have to work with communities and look at kind of community scale renewable energy.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm sure I join the rest of the people listening in to thank Peter Stockton, Peter Reynolds and Sarah Whiteley for their really interesting presentations, and hopefully that will answer a lot of the questions that you have within the parish councils. Richard, is the recording available? What are you going to do with that?
Yes, it will be available. We just need to top and tail it, and then we can send out a link to it to all of the parish councils, including the ones that weren't able to attend this evening.
And people can share that.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Okay, well, it only remains to thank all the people that have attended and to listen and asked questions and hopefully absorbed all that information and have the chance to absorb it through the recording. Thanks once again for the speakers, and have a nice evening.